welcome to the Total Soccer Show World Cup Daily. Great news if you like Lumberjacks, Maple Leaves and Tim Hortons beans. Canada is through to the round of 16. For most of the game, it was tied at zeros, but we got a late winner and we got Canadian heroes. Also on this episode, we'll preview the USMNT's demeanour as they prepare to face Bosnia and Herzegovina. My name's Ryan Bailey. Joining me today, hello Taylor Rockwell, back in your Virginia homestead. How are you?
I am doing well, aside from sick children. That's always a fun way to start the day, right? But I am very excited to be here with you three fine fellows back together, not in person, but via the magic of the internet. Here we are, chatting via tubes, and I couldn't be happier.
Indeed. Likewise, Taylor. Graham Rudson's here. Graham, have you somehow passed your perennial sickness onto Taylor's children?
It seems that way, although Taylor being back in Virginia is confusing because I was away. I'm still in the Los Angeles house. I thought you guys had been quiet. I thought I was just letting you sleep in. You guys not here?
Graham's just never leaving.
Yeah.
Graham lives
We
there.
went out for snacks and we just didn't tell Graham. Sorry about that, Graham.
That figures.
Yeah, there we go.
I guess
Joe
I better
Lowry's
go home
also
then.
here. Hi, Joe. How are you?
Hey, I'm great. I think Graham's perspective on us being gone and him still being there is that he gets to eat even more cereal without me cutting into his supplies. So, Graham, there is a silver lining on this particular cloud for sure.
Joe, did you have that feeling of like, I want cereal, but I'm worried that I'm like cutting into Graham's stash and he's going to come out raging one morning? Not that Graham ever seemed inclined to rage. I just don't know what happens if he doesn't have the appropriate breakfast cereals.
You know, not especially because I tried to pick my spots. Graham was going hard after the Lucky Charms, and unfortunately, I think I've outgrown Lucky Charms these days. And so I dipped into more of the CTC or the Golden Grahams or Frosted Flakes.
Cinnamon Toast
like
Crunch is the more grown-up cereal compared to Lucky Charms, is it?
Not
Is that what we're
necessarily. I didn't say one was
toast.
more or less grown up than the other.
Right,
but
toast.
Lucky Charms, I just personally think I've grown out of. My taste buds find it repulsive now.
Okay.
All right.
Mine don't, apparently.
We are no
Repulsive.
longer in Los Angeles with Graham's childhood proclivities, cereal-based proclivities, and his tendency to set the thermostat to 86 degrees. I'm still not over it. But we are going to be recording, of course, on every World Cup match day in our usual recording schedule. Very excited to talk about the games that are coming up in this week. And also, we're going to be talking in this episode about the first round of 32 game with Canada going through. Before we get there, patreon.com/Total Soccer Show is the best way to support us. You'll get bonus episodes, bonus video, access to our Discord server where all the cool kids are hanging out. We're talking World Cup and much more. Do join us, patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. Joe Lowry, Canada won, South Africa 0 was game 73 at this tournament. That's a lot, isn't it? Yeah.
73. How many games were the last World Cup? Like this many? Less than this many? Delightful.
Typically they're 64. So
There you go.
Yeah,
Less
we've
than
already,
this many.
Yeah, indeed. We have passed the threshold. That is good news for Canada, who not necessarily a classic game they played out here, but a huge moment, obviously, for Canadian soccer. Stephen Eustachio of LAFC on loan from Porto with the 92nd minute winner. The Maple Leaves, the first team to reach the round of 16. This was, Joe, the first knockout game to feature two nations new to the knockout rounds as well.
Wow.
Canada had lost all 6 of their World Cup matches prior to this tournament, and they've done it here on foreign soil as well. Congrats to Canada, Joe.
Yeah, first ever home nation to play a home World Cup game away from home. and we've never seen that before. We're going to start seeing it more with how the World Cup is trending these days. Also, one more little nugget off the top. You talked about Stephen Eustachio's goal, and it's a really nice goal and a huge moment for Canada to sort of salvage this game that they were favored in and to avoid extra time where anything can happen. Stephen Eustachio is the first ever number 7 who's represented Portugal to score a goal in a World Cup knockout game. That's from the Athletics' Colin Millar. It sounds fake between Ronaldo and Figo. Apparently, that is real. I mean, Eustachio at times has played for Portugal in the youth setup. Wears number 7 now for Canada, scored a goal in the World Cup knockouts. I cannot believe that fact is true. Great pull from Colin there. This game was not a classic, and I do suppose that this is another reminder for me about how I am not especially enthusiastic about the extra teams at this World Cup. It's going to take a lot of time for Canada, South Africa to feel like a game that we should be seeing in the round of 32, like in the knockout rounds. And it's not just about those teams, right? You could say the same thing, frankly, about the USA Bosnia coming up on Wednesday. And we're going to talk about that game later on. It just doesn't feel like those are the games that we're supposed to be getting at this stage. Now, maybe I'll change my tune after today's matchups because there's a lot of fun ones and I'm still having a great time. But this, to me, was another reminder of just how diluted this tournament sort of has become and how low stakes the first bit was that both of these teams are here. Not to discredit them, I suppose, but...
Yeah, just on the theme of facts that sound fake but are in fact real. This is only the third ever knockout round match at a World Cup to involve two teams from outside UEFA and South America. Wow. It's only the third time that's happened. But that's another thing that's going to happen more often as we move forward in this expanded format. But when I read that, thought that sounded fake, but it is in fact real. And yeah, I agree with Joe. This match was not a classic, to say the least. Canada were the better team. Not by much, but they were the team that for the most part played on the front foot. Pretty much all the numbers back that up. They had 4 big chances in the game while South Africa had none. I found South Africa's approach to be, at least for the first quarter, up until I just said for the first quarter. I hate that already. Up until the first hydration break,
when they got orange slices.
That's right.
Yeah, you usually only get orange slices at halftime, but they're doing it at the quarters for these games.
Oh, I thought FIFA were holding them back. I thought they were powered by Powerade or 7-Eleven or something like that.
Aramco oranges.
That's right, yeah. But up until that first hydration break, I found South Africa's approach to be just so passive, where they were slowing it down to walking pace to try and actually extended into after the hydration break as well. But they were trying to bait the Canada press. And at first, Canada were engaging them to a certain extent, and then laterally in the half, they just weren't engaging at all. So it resulted in these weird periods of both teams just standing completely still. And the crowd at SoFi, it was coming across on the TV, which seemed to be mainly neutral. I saw a lot of people saying there were more Mexican fans than Canadian fans, obviously with the short turnaround with this game. But they were booing South Africa every time that they did this. It was a weird first half. Most of the chances in the first half were Canada's, mainly from set pieces. Eustáquio was obviously such a threat with his deliveries from set pieces. And then in the second half, it felt destined for extra time until Eustáquio popped up with a very nicely taken winner. So certainly not a classic, but ultimately I do think the stronger team has emerged into the round of 16.
I would agree with that, and I would agree with everything Joe said as well. I think if I want to be like an optimist or charitable, I would say that with everything we've already talked about with these two teams having never made the knockout round before, this game felt very much to me like a game in which it was two teams that had never been to this level before and were desperate not to go home, but also desperate not to make like high-profile mistakes that could cost them. And I think hadn't really had the experience of playing at that level, in that level of pressure, with that kind of atmosphere. And so you got a much cagier, more nervous game in my mind, in which you would get chances here and there, but it felt like even then there was always an eye on like make sure we're defensively solid, make sure we have numbers where we need them. So if we can create something with the few players we're committing, awesome. But also everybody get back and don't give anything away and don't give any cheap fouls and don't pick up unnecessary cards. And I feel like both teams were kind of playing with that mentality in place. And it took a great goal from Eustáquio to kind of break that a little bit, but it did feel to me like two teams that were not yet here, or not yet like experienced at being here. And the idea, I think, would be that with the expanded format, more teams get these opportunities, and then it becomes maybe more common for them to be in these positions, in these situations, and then maybe the quality improves as a result. But I felt like this game was probably really engaging if you were Canadian or South African.
For sure.
And then if you're a junkie like we all are now, maybe it was also engaging for different reasons. But otherwise, I would agree it was not a classic to start the knockout round.
Yeah, I agree with that, Taylor, and I think I certainly agree with that on the side of South Africa, who it just felt like they were playing for a shootout in this game, and I suppose to a certain extent they got close because they took it to stoppage time, and it's a shot from outside the box, a very nicely taken shot from Eustáquio from outside the box. But South Africa just had the weirdest World Cup where they started so poorly in that opening game at the Azteca, then they responded really well, but went out with a real whimper in this game, and they offered next to nothing in possession or as an attacking threat. And also when you consider that so many of these players play together for Mamelodi Sundowns, who have this reputation for playing with flair, and they I googled what the style of play is called. We recently talked about it on 101, Taylor. Shoe shine and piano is what Mamelodi Sundowns call that style of play. It's their trademark style of play. They're famous for it. They play on the front foot with the ball. Quick interchanges, and like South Africa used none of that in this match, and so they deserve to go out in my opinion.
It's a reminder though of just how important talent is, right? Because for all of South Africa's, I thought South Africa did some clever play in build-up in this game when the ball was at Ronald Williams' foot. he was looking for those clipped balls in between the lines for Canada. And South Africa would leave their center backs and oftentimes a deeper midfielder deep in their own third, and then they would push a lot of numbers high to stretch Canada's shape vertically. So Canada's back line ended up being quite deep, and their forwards who do want to press were extended quite high. And there were gaps then for Williams to pick out in Canada's block. And I think he was waiting for those opportunities to open up, and also certainly happy to see time tick off the clock. I thought South Africa had some decent moments in build-up, and they accessed the final third on occasion in this game, which is not the easiest thing to do against a steely Canada team. That has Moise Bombito back in the team, which is massive for them, really, really important. I'm sure we'll talk more about Canada's additions later on. But the reality for South Africa is for all of their cleverness in build-up, and I do think there legitimately was some, they just don't have the horses in the final third. Like, they just could not threaten once they got there. And no style, like no approach there is probably going to do a whole lot for them, because they're up against more physical and more effective defenders and a midfield structure that can go back and help for Canada. And South Africa just lack those 1v1 players. The reality for South Africa is that they just don't have that attacking juice in them. They just don't. I believe they were fourth in the entire round they were fourth among teams that made it to the round of 32. In a fourth bottom in expected goals so far. Like, they just have not created chances at this tournament. They did not do that in this game, and I think that's why they were so happy to see some of those moments tick off the clock and build up.
Yeah, South Africa finished the game with an XG of 0.13. So I, for one, am thankful.
Is that a lot?
Yeah, no. Well, for South Africa, maybe it's all relative, Graham.
By Scottish standards, that seems a lot.
Exactly. I am grateful for that 92nd minute winner for saving us half an hour of our lives of this one, certainly. But Alphonso Davies, Graham, obviously is a huge addition for Canada. We only had a handful of minutes of Alphonso Davies at this tournament so far, but he's going to be pretty vital if Netherlands or Morocco are on the horizon, obviously. So that's going to be a big factor.
Yeah, off the bench in the 75th minute, as you say, Ryan, a massive boost that he is at least available now. Thought he, as would be expected, thought he looked not fully fit, but there were still moments where clearly he's, the most talented player on this team. I don't know what the likelihood is that he will start that game against the Netherlands or Morocco, depending on who comes through that round of 32 tie later today as we're recording. And it's a shame, because it feels like had Canada... Look, they would still be at a talent disadvantage, but the way that they're playing under Jesse Marsh, I feel like they have a coherent playing style. They seem to be bought in to him and his corny motivational speaking, which we should talk a little bit more about, because I thought that was one of the highlights of the whole match. They're bought in, and if Ismail Kone was fit, and if I guess Bombito now is back in the lineup. And there were a couple of moments in this game where South Africa threatened to get in behind and he made an intervention, and you think, okay, that's why he's important to this Canadian team. But if all their best players were fit, maybe they have a fighter's chance against Netherlands and Morocco. Maybe they still will. But I would be surprised if Davies is in the lineup for that game. It still feels like he's off the pace quite significantly.
Yeah, it does. He comes in and has an immediate impact, and you can see his just overall quality and that he is accustomed to playing at a higher level with his touch, with his vision. Like, I think one of the first things he does is like thread the needle into, I think it's Kyle Larin who lays off for Jonathan David, and it creates a shot. Maybe it's a corner from that one. But either way, you can see him opening up the defense with his passing ability and just overall vision, and then technical play on top. And it was like an elevated period when he first comes on. They start to really threaten. He himself is taking people on, but then also he's pulling defenders out. They're starting to double team him. That is opening up space that wasn't there previously. And so for like 10 to 15 minutes, it felt like, here we go. This is the guy they've been missing. And it obviously was. To your point, though, Graham, then there are moments when he tries to take people on and the touch is just a little bit heavier, or maybe he doesn't have the acceleration. And after those 15 minutes, it felt like, I think we might be seeing the fitness and like how he's not maybe been training at the level required to go for a longer amount of time. But I think they desperately need him to. So I agree with you. I don't think we will see him in the starting lineup, but I think we will see him in that game because he just can be such a difference maker. I'm assuming the game plan would be sort of do what they did in this one, but like be like press from the front when they can, defend deeper if they need to, hassle and harry and cause problems. If you can create something from a set piece or maybe from open play, awesome. But then in the second half, if things are still kind of level, he can be a difference maker who can give you that momentum you need to maybe get a winner or an equalizer or whatever the situation might be. I think he is that important to this Canada team. I just don't know if we're going to see him at the fitness level required.
Yes. Jesse Marsh's speech, Graham, you touched on it there. We got a glimpse of it on the broadcast. Some of it came through. You should be so proud of who you are. You should be proud of this game. You went after it moment after moment. You are Canadian heroes. The future of the sport in this country is huge because of you. It's a nice sentiment, Graham, but also...
You left out the part at the end. Do you want me to conclude? It was, and you're better than the United States, and the U.S. isn't good, and I never wanted to coach them in the first place.
Sorry. Yeah.
The thing is, he had no idea the cameras were on him either.
So this is my
Just a
question,
coincidence.
right? I don't think we've seen this any other time or had the live hot mic on this kind of thing before. Was this like set up in advance? Has Jesse Marsh said to like the producers, "I'm going to do a thing at the end if we win. Come and get the mic on me."
No, I mean, I don't know as obviously the answer to that. I'd be surprised, though. I think it's just a case of if you do a team talk on the field, the cameras are going to be on you naturally. Like the TV directors are going to focus on that. And look, the thing is, obviously, Jesse Marsh is mega cringe to like us normies. I suspect athletes really respond to that stuff. And Marsh he's now had a lot of success with this team. I spoke about buy-in. Like I think he has got full buy-in from this group of players. And, you know, I know the format has changed, but this was still Canada's first knockout win at a Men's World Cup. And they've come such a long way, and they're going to have that blockbuster last 16 tie against the Netherlands or Morocco. That could be a real culmination for this team. And so I don't know. I still, despite myself and despite everything, I still quite like Jesse Marsh. And so I feel like he's earned his cringe. Like I can kind of excuse it to a certain extent. I think this stuff works in dressing rooms, even if it seems a bit sort of high performance.
I think it works until it doesn't. And that's where, in some ways, Jesse Marsh has like strong J.J. Abrams vibes to me of like when you're into it and you're enjoying what he's doing, it's like, man, this is awesome. This is the best thing ever. And once you start to kind of see the cracks and be like, oh, we've done this before, haven't we? Suddenly maybe it feels a little bit repetitive and a little bit like I'm not quite vibing with it. And I think that's what happened with Marsh at times in his European exploits. And when you see players start to be like, like, do you want to do any tactics here, or are we just getting a motivational speech? Like, that's where I think sometimes it can fall apart a little bit. But I agree with you. It does seem like this Canada team is appreciative of his approach and seems to be responding to it. When a game requires, like, more than just a motivational speech, but, like, significant tactical adjustments and in-game adjustments to deal with new and unexpected threats, that's where I think we'll see if Marsh deserves the hype. But I agree with you overall, Graham. I think he probably is someone who comes away from this having the admiration of more neutral viewers because of that level of intensity and approach and vim and vigor and all that good stuff.
To be fair, though, Taylor, your point that it works until it doesn't, isn't that the case of all soccer?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose. But I think there is something to be said for having different ways of reaching players and different ways of speaking to a team if that team requires a different voice or a different style of communication. And I think that there are times when you need to tear into a team in the locker room and kind of like with that oppositional approach get sort of a defiant response from them. But there are other times when it requires an arm around the shoulder. There are other times when it requires not an emotional approach, but hey, this isn't working. This is what we need to be doing. This needs to adjust here. And I think a more versatile approach can give you more versatile results.
Yeah. I actually quite like it. I like what he's done there. It's a bit performative because he's done it on the field. There's a reason he's done that and not done it in the locker room, right? So we have to acknowledge that. I don't know. I quite like the positivity of it. It reminded me of there was those clips of him in Germany doing it in German, which I always thought were quite impressive as well. And I wonder whether the players like, does this so cringy? What's this going on here?
But like, was it Phil Brown for Hull City?
Yep.
Who, like, when his team was playing so poorly, he made them do the halftime talk, like on the pitch, and he's like dressing them down. But that, like, we all still remember that, except for Joe, who was maybe in elementary school when that happened. He says not jokingly. So, and I think of that as being a thing that people point to as. Like, for a moment, I think some thought, like, that's what it's all about. You got to, like, treat them like children. And then I think the general response was, like, that is a manager who doesn't know how to speak to his team and has lost the occasion in the moment. So it's a fine line, I guess is what I'm saying. And thus far, it seems like Marsh is on the right side of that line.
And I feel like if Marsh does that as Leeds United manager away to Burnley, like the setting is just not. I think that was what I was trying to get to with this is an achievement for Canada. If you do that after a knockout win at a home, I know this game was in Los Angeles, but technically a home World Cup for Canada, I feel like you've earned that moment. Like this is one of the times where you can get away with something like that. So I didn't hate it.
Yeah, excellent. Well, very well done to Canada. Get yourself a beaver tail, Canucks out there. Very well done indeed. It's Netherlands or Morocco, as noted, coming up next. That's going to be a challenge, whichever direction that tie goes in. But yeah, would be very interesting for Canada. Congrats once again. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to preview the US's clash with Bosnia. Join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to World Cup Daily. It's time to look ahead to Wednesday's clash in Santa Clara, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 local. The USMNT taking on Bosnia in the round of 32. Taylor, vibe check. How are we feeling going into this one? What's the confidence level on a scale?
You might be asking the wrong person. I don't know if I will ever be confident for a U.S. game at a World Cup. I think I am much more comfortable feeling like an underdog and feeling like its back's against the wall. Joe, I think in speaking to some players after the loss to Turkey, it seems like I am not alone in that sentiment, that I think the players themselves don't want to be seen as the favorites. They see themselves as the underdogs. So I'm always going to approach, especially knockout round World Cup games, with a feeling of it could go wrong. We don't want to overlook the opponent. We don't want to take them for granted. And I don't think we are with Bosnia. But I will say, having gone back and watched a couple of their games from this tournament, there are reasons to believe that the U.S. should win this game. I think maybe the lowest level of energy I can put into it. There are reasons to be confident, I would say. And that does not mean to diminish anything Bosnia has done. I am not trying to be disrespectful to them. I am not trying to provide them locker room material, because apparently you say one thing one time and that gets posterized. Just ask Mike Grella. So in this case,
me.
all I'll say, or Graham, all I'll say is that I think with what they have done in this tournament, especially in the game against the Swiss when they lose pretty resoundingly, there are similarities in what the Swiss do to what the U.S. wants to do. And I think that can cause pretty big problems for Bosnia. And then I think their strengths also sort of play into the U.S.'s defensive strengths a little bit. So I do think the U.S. is rightfully the favorite going into this game. It requires them to execute their game plan, and there will be wrinkles and wrenches thrown in that they'll have to navigate and deal with. And that's where I trust Pochettino to give the motivational speech, but then also give the tactics to help find a way through.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me that Bosnia and Herzegovina are one of the worst teams in the round of 32. And I don't think there's a lot of arguing with that. They have the lowest expected goals from the group stage of any team that made it out of the group. They
Lower
finished
than
third.
South Africa. Wow.
Yeah, right. They finished third in maybe the worst group at the entire tournament, in that Canada, South Africa, Canada, Bosnia and Herzegovina, of course, Switzerland, and Qatar group. They did not show a lot along the way. Now, they can do things that will frustrate the U.S., and they did frustrate teams in the group stage. That they don't have a lot of attacking juice and a lot of speed on the counter means that they end up being more focused on constricting space and trying to do specific things defensively, usually in their own half, though at times they're willing to extend further. They are focused on those things because of their inability to do some other things, right? And they certainly do have some attacking pieces that if you sleep, you'll be in trouble. You think about the skill they have on the outside areas in the attack with Esmir Baraktarovic on the right, if he does indeed start. Alabegovic on the left, the 18-year-old RB Salzburg wide attacker, and then Demirovic and Dzeko as their front two, presumably. That would be my expectation, at least for the front two and Alabegovic. I'm not 100% sure Baraktarovic will start because he hasn't started every game. But there are good technical pieces there on the outsides, and there are good physical forwards who can give the U.S. some problems through the middle. At the same time, I think how Bosnia and Herzegovina defend is not especially different from how Paraguay defended in the U.S.'s opening game. If they are as open as Paraguay were in their mid-block, the U.S. are going to have a lot of chances. And I have more kind of nuanced thoughts on how Bosnia defend, but sort of as a top line, I think this is a great matchup for the U.S., and I think they absolutely should expect to win this game, or whatever the psychology is that players have to actually accomplish that.
Graham, what do you make of Bosnia thus far and the challenge they represent?
Impressed that they have made it this far, and I don't mean that to sound disrespectful, but on the level of the talent, making it to the round of 32, a knockout game at a World Cup, I think is a real achievement. They want to make this game a slog. when I've watched them at this tournament, and also I watched them in the 2 playoff games where they beat Wales and Italy. Let's not forget that, particularly the Italy game. I know we like to laugh at Italy, particularly you, Ryan, but that's quite an achievement, making sure that Italy didn't qualify for this tournament. But when I've watched them, they try and slow down the game, right? And they try and keep the space between the lines at a minimum. They'll set up in their 4-4-2, out of possession, and they have had some success with doing that at this tournament. The one team they came up against who were able to quicken it up for about 20 minutes in this tournament was Switzerland, and I was at that game, and they scored like 4 times in those 20 minutes. So the US should attempt, and I know sometimes it's easier said than done, but they should attempt to keep their intensity high, which is something they've done well in this tournament so far. I guess what's quite interesting is this could be the final match where the US wants to do that at all times after this, because you're moving into the last 16. It's potentially Belgium, right? We think is
right.
the next, if it goes
or Senegal
form.
would be the other.
Or Senegal, yeah. I mean, either of those games, the dynamic changes, right, in terms of who's going to control the ball for at least the full 90 minutes. And obviously at that point, it could be beneficial for the US to be the ones to slow down the game at points. But in this match, I think speed is going to be the USA's friend. And if we see a performance like the one, particularly against Paraguay, I think Joe's wise to highlight that game with just the attacking sequences and how quick the US were to have little exchange plays through the midfield and into the final third. I can see Bosnia getting put in the washing machine in the same way that Switzerland did to them when Johan Manzambi came off the bench.
Taylor, I know you went back through and watched a lot of the Bosnia-Herzegovina versus Switzerland game. I did the same and watched some other clips of them defending from the group stage so far. Grim, you're spot on with how Bosnia start in that 4-4-2 defensive block. The interesting thing about them is it's not just that, as far as my understanding is. They will sit in that block, but they will chop and change exactly the shape of their defensive setup based off of what the opposition is doing. So Carlin Carpenter, who's, I believe, an analyst for Manchester United women's team and his former Houston Dynamo analyst, he was posting a bit about this on social media, and he's right on the money, of course, talking about how Bosnia do match up player for player in that game against Switzerland on the back line. So if Switzerland pushed another number forward, Bosnia would drop one of their wide midfielders to deal with it and to give them either parity or give them a +1 on the back line, or they would take one of their central midfielders in that double pivot back into the back line. And so I do imagine for this game, Bosnia's defensive shape is going to be heavily dependent on exactly how the U.S. set up in this match, and they're going to try to make sure that they always have enough numbers in the back line to deal with. Typically, it's a front 5 for the U.S., right, with Dest on one side, Robinson on the other, then the half spaces of Pulisic and McKennie, and then Balogun through the middle. They're going to want to try to be matched up with that. But what I saw in that game against Switzerland, and Manzambi did key a lot of this with his dynamic running, is Manzambi consistently snuck behind his marker over and over and over again to receive the ball in behind Bosnia-Herzegovina, who were not sitting super deep. Even in the earlier stages of that game, they weren't in like a hyper low block by any stretch of the imagination, which is again why it reminded me of Paraguay, because Paraguay were not that either. They were very much a mid-block team and gave the U.S. space to attack in behind. And Bosnia did that against Switzerland. It was very similar in that way, where Manzambi all of a sudden was making all these dynamic runs in a way that nobody really was doing, at least not in the half spaces, for Switzerland early on in that game. And you know what U.S. player very much reminds me of Johan Manzambi, the positionless, dynamic, athletic, technical on the ball player. Weston McKennie. Weston McKennie will absolutely start this U.S. game, barring some sort of injury or other absolute insanity. McKennie is the player in the U.S. pool that has been consistently disorganizing opponents with his ability off the ball. I think this game is set up very well for McKennie to be an impact player, where he is consistently moving and finding those pockets in behind his marker and going and just breaking this Bosnia defense wide open. There's going to need to be more than just Weston McKennie for it to be a really sharp U.S. performance, but that gives them some room for error. But I think McKennie is going to be the Manzambi of this game, and when Manzambi came on the field, that was what absolutely turned the tide to that Switzerland win.
Do you trust him to do that, like, dynamic dribbling as well? Because it's the running, obviously, for Manzambi. It's the moving all over to find space. But I also feel like it was him, at times, just taking people on and having a successful dribble where he gets past one or two, and that sort of breaks through Bosnia's defensive efforts. Do you feel like McKennie can do that, or are you not looking for him to do that?
I think he can do some of it. I'm not sure he's quite as effective in those moments as Manzambi is. But I do think he has shown McKennie throughout this tournament so far some of that 1v1 ability. I mean, he was, in a lot of ways, I thought the U.S.'s brightest attacker against Turkey, which low bar, right? But he has done some of that stuff in the triangles on the right side with McKennie with Dest and Freeman on that right side. There's been a lot of fluidity, and McKennie, I think, has taken players on well at times in this tournament. But the other thing, so if we're talking about Bosnia defending in sort of a more man-oriented fashion, especially along the back line, they're not quite as man-oriented higher up. That's one way to beat that is by sending runners in behind because you're going to catch the markers unaware. Another way, Taylor, to your point, is with that 1v1 ability. And the U.S. has players certainly who are better 1v1 than McKennie. And I think they have players who are better 1v1 than anybody that Switzerland has as well. Yeah. So again, there's another factor there that I think sets up reasonably well for the U.S.
Yeah, to go over some ground that's already been trod, but just to lay it out one more time, I think Bosnia, to Joe's point, can do a couple different things when they are defending, and they will be against the ball for most of the game. That's my expectation, at least. And they can engage higher up. They can even press at times with that front two, which I'm assuming will be Dzeko and Demirovic. It hasn't always been at this tournament, but that is kind of their best look. It does allow them to press. Both of them are older, Dzeko significantly so. And the way they're able to do that is that back line, as Joe's talked about, then steps up with them, and they will routinely have all of their players within maybe 24 yards of each other vertically, so that they're compressing the space in between. So you either have to go long or you have to try to find a way through. But if you do that, you're kind of playing into what they want you to do. If you go long, I think they're also okay with that, because they back their defenders to be able to cover with speed. They back Vasil, their goalkeeper, to be able to come off the line and collect the ball. But either way, it disrupts the opposition from having kind of sustained moments of possession. Once that line is bypassed, or if they're sort of feeling the fatigue, that is where I think they drop off a little bit more. They will be more defensive, not quite in a full block, but close to it. And that is where I totally agree with Joe. They do a really good job of making sure that they have positive numbers where they need them. So against the Swiss, when the Swiss would play wide, if they had two attackers wide, Switzerland, there would be two Bosnian defenders, and then there would be at least two more defenders than there were attackers in the box. They always put numbers central, so any crosses that come in, you would kind of expect them to win, but they also are going to have trouble getting past you out wide because at the very least it's an even match. And then the Swiss would then send another attacker over to try to get a 3v2. To Joe's point, that's where Bosnia would adjust and a defender would go with. And so there was always kind of comparable numbers wide with a numerical superiority in the middle. And the Swiss, I think, for the longest part of that game, didn't really try to exploit that. They didn't crash numbers, they didn't overload the box, and they didn't overload the wings. What they did do, and where I think the U.S. can find some joy, is, as Joe said, have some individual kind of moments of quality. But then also, there were very clear rotations in one Swiss player would go from like center mid across into like the half space, and a defender would go with. And then a like forward who was stretching the line would then check back, and that defender would go, but then there would be a run into the space that had just been vacated. And this all happened pretty automatically. But when that happens, you would have a Bosnian defender sort of tracking that run, but also trying to track the neutral space, and they're splitting the difference. And that's when they did start to get opened up. That's when you could find space. And that's a thing that the U.S. has done really well so far in this tournament, is press and harass until they force a turnover, but then attack with speed and with numbers. And if you do that, I think you can overwhelm and create chances. But also, I think if there are established patterns of movement when you're on the ball, and it's not receive the ball, turn, pick your head up, wait for a run, pass to that player receives, picks their head up. Like, if you slow it down in possession, that just allows Bosnia to get back into shape, and now they can defend with numbers. You're going to have problems. If you can force turnovers high, make them uncomfortable, and then either take them on 1v1 or open them up with kind of pre-programmed patterns, I think that's also a way that you can create a ton of space and a ton of opportunity.
Yeah. Graham, any thoughts on the Bosnian danger men to look out for in this one? Taylor's mentioned the front two. There's also Kerim Alabegovic on the left midfield, who I believe is young enough to be Edin Dzeko's son, but obviously someone who might be able to get some pace on the counter.
Yeah, Edin Dzeko, who is the captain of a country he is 6 years older than, which I always enjoy that fact about Edin Dzeko. Yeah, I think, to be honest, the names have already kind of been mentioned. Baraktarovic, obviously, they've sort of been rotating between three starting wingers, so Baraktarovic has been one of them, Alabegovic has been another one, and then Amar Memic is the third one. I think when you look at how Bosnia play in the attack, they look to use those wide areas as a funnel into the final third, and then it's about either getting goal threat from those two players or getting it into the penalty area for one of the two forwards, Edin Dzeko obviously being the obvious attacking focal point there. And I do think, the US will have a technical and maybe even a physical advantage here, but Bosnia are a team who are clear in what they want to do. And I think this could be the biggest test that the US fullbacks have faced at this tournament so far, kind of eliminating that Turkey game, which, dead rubber, rotated team. I'm sort of removing that from my thoughts. But yeah, I think Bosnia will want to take Jedi and Freeman inside off the wing, where there could be like a split second of confusion over who they're passing those players on to, and that then creates a little bit of space for a shot, or maybe even like a recycled pass out wide for an uncontested cross into the box. So I think that's an area where Bosnia could really test the US. And just to repeat my point, like, this is a team that is not afraid of the slog. They made it through their 2 playoff games to make it to this World Cup in penalty shootouts. So that's another area where they potentially might have an edge over the US, just familiarity with that situation and that scenario. And then also set pieces is the other area where they are threatening. They're the tallest team in this World Cup on average. I think they've scored a couple of set piece goals at this World Cup already. And sometimes it's been a common theme of criticism with this US side. Their penalty box defending hasn't always been the greatest. So that's another area where I think the US certainly can't be complacent about this test.
With the wide players for a moment, I've seen a lot of prospective 11s have it be Bayraktarovic on the right and Ali Begovic on the left. I personally would be surprised if we see both of them start, because I think of both of them as being more attacking options and the players that they rely on to sort of spark counterattacks, to carry the ball forward if it's not kind of playing through Dzeko and Demirovic centrally, where it's like going long, knocking it down, and then trying to build around them. What they will do, Bosnia, is play it like from the goal kick. They'll play it to a center back plays it wide to a fullback, back to the center back to the fullback, and that baits the opposition numbers forward, and then they try to go long in the channels, or they'll try to go long to one of their target men. And what I would expect, this is based solely on the games I've watched and what I think they might do, is that it could be, I think it would be a mistake to not start Bayraktarovic, but what I think they might do is on their right side, which would be the US's side, which I think they would assume with Pulisic in there would be the side that has the most of the attacks. Memic is one who can be a midfielder, but also is comfortable being a wingback/fullback, and he is one who will kind of drop into the back line to give them a 5 if that's what's required. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see either Ali Begovic or Bayraktarovic on one side with Memic on the other to give them that sort of defensive cover with some attacking creativity and attacking speed at that. If it's both of them, I think the U.S. should feel even more confident. Again, I don't want to be overly confident, and I don't want to dismiss the opposition, but if you have 2 more attacking options in there, both of whom are younger, that feels like areas of opportunity again. They will have Muramemovic, who was suspended after the red card against the Swiss. He was out for Qatar. He's one of their more established center backs. I would assume he will start in the defense, and I'm assuming it will be Tahirovic and Sunic in the middle. It might be Besic. That's who started against, I believe, Qatar. But the Tahirovic-Sunic combination has been what they had in qualifying, and I think gives them a good amount of grit and familiarity. Sunic will usually, in that midfield too, be the one to kind of stay deeper and track the kind of number 10 or the more creative attackers. But then if they go back towards the defense to pick up the ball, he will track them all the way back, and then there will be cover there. So he's a very versatile kind of defensive midfielder who then can come out and be a bit more aggressive when they need him to. To Joe's point, it's very much opposition and man-oriented when it needs to be for Bosnia, which again I think leaves the U.S. with plenty of opportunity to attack.
Wow. So Bosnia, basically a 4-4-2, they're drawing the opponents towards them and then launching a long ball. They're 90s Wimbledon. This is a bad time for me to become a Bosnia fan. Wow. Very bad. Okay. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll go deeper into this game. We'll do our starting 11s and see how this one's going to go. Join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to World Cup Daily. All right, Joe Lowry, how do you think the US is going to shape up? Give me your dream starting 11 for this one.
I will be floored if there is any dissension in the ranks on this particular US 11. I would go with
Robinson. Obviously.
That's right. Yep. Let's get all the injured lads in there. So let's get Trusty and Roldan in. Absolutely. I would go with the same 11 that the U.S. started this tournament with. So that would be Matt Freese in goal. That would be in the defensive shape. I'll just build it that way because it's a little simpler. Alex Freeman at right back, then Chris Richards and Tim Ream in the middle. Anthony Robinson at left back. In midfield, Tyler Adams and Malik Tillman would be the double pivot of sorts. And then on the right side, you would have... why have I just now forgotten? You have Sergiño Dest on the right. That's how the U.S. is set up. Then on the left side, you have Christian Pulisic and then Weston McKennie and Folarin Balogun. In possession, that would look like the back three with Alex Freeman next to the center backs. You would have Dest and Robinson high and wide. In the half spaces, you would have Pulisic on the left, McKennie on the right, with Balogun through the middle. Then Adams would be your deep midfielder, and then Malik Tillman has had a bit of a free role to sort of go and do what he wants from there. To me, and I am curious if anybody sees this differently, that is the most talented 11 that the U.S. can put on the field. I don't think there's a reason to go with the two-striker setup here because that was the break glass in case of emergency if Pulisic isn't ready to go. And it very much seems like after his 40 minutes against Turkey, where he looked really good, that he will be ready to go. I just don't see a reason to deviate from the 11 that gave you the best performance of the tournament so far.
Agree entirely, and I'm going to guess Graham does too. Graham?
Yep.
So then, Joe, what I'll ask you is, let's say like it's 0-0 at halftime. What are the adjustments? Like, who are the players that you could see being brought off, and what would they offer? Because, like, for me, if the U.S. is getting, like, if it's like a slow, lots of fouls, like tempo disrupted, like, do you bring in Seb Berhalter to like be on set pieces and give you more accuracy there? If it's Bosnia, like if they are kind of pushing numbers and crowding space, do you want Tim Weah making runs in behind, ideally timing them better so he's not offside? What are the like adjustments you think could give the U.S. an advantage if they need it?
Yeah, to me, the attacking players off the bench that make the most sense to bring into a game are Tim Weah and Gio Reyna. Still for this team, Reyna, if the game is really sloggy and compact, he's the one who can hit the final ball. He did that at times against Turkey, even if maybe you would have preferred him to be a little bit more impressive in that game. I still thought he was one of the U.S.'s better players. And then Weah, specifically on the right. I mean, Tim Weah doesn't dribble, and so when you play him on the left, his inability to do anything is a huge problem, right? Because he doesn't cut in on that right foot because he's not a 1v1 player. He is, when he's on the right, a straight line, get in behind, combine a little bit, and then race him behind, and then play a lovely right-footed cross across the face of goal. On the left, he can't do any of that stuff. And so it's no surprise that time after time when Pochettino's used him there, he hasn't looked impressive. So I would specifically put him on the right side. And the change that we haven't seen because the U.S. hasn't needed it would be, I think, Dest going to right back and then Weah going to the wide attacker spot on that right side. And then that triangle gets even a little bit more fluid and dangerous. That feels like it could be a nice break glass in case of emergency thing there.
Joe, does that require the game state to be different than anticipated to get anything out of Weah? Like if you're saying, and I agree, like he doesn't give you a lot of 1v1 quality, and when we're talking about how Bosnia are going to set up and approach this game, it feels like the US need players to eliminate opponents, whether that's like beating someone on the dribble or little attacking sequences. And I don't necessarily associate Weah. I think this could definitely be a Gio Reyna game because the way that Bosnia are going to set up in that 4-4-2, the US is going to, on paper at least, going to have a man advantage. And so who do you want to be that free man? It feels like Gio Reyna's your best bet for. He will also be on the pitch, but a different free man. Gio Reyna feels like he fits that bill, whereas like Weah, I'm not totally sold that this could be this is necessarily a game for him.
Yeah, I mean, and that's why I wouldn't start him by any stretch of the imagination. Right. But the reality is the U.S. doesn't have a lot of players on the bench that scream, I'm a great answer to Taylor's question. At the end of the day, that is still a great area for the U.S. to grow. They still don't have a lot of talent, a lot of depth to bring off the bench. And that's probably going to be a noticeable part of why they don't win the World Cup, right? So as far as Weah in particular, I talked about McKennie running in behind. I think Weah is also great at that as a general rule, especially when he is on the right and he can play the final ball with his right foot. And I think if you want him to be a guy who eliminates players on the dribble, you're barking up the wrong tree. If you want him to be a guy that beats his marker in a different way by doing it off the ball and meeting good service in behind, I think he can do that sort of stuff. So I certainly wouldn't start him, and I don't think you want to be in a position where you need to rely heavily on Tim Weah in this game. But if you're not looking at, I think, the three players that Taylor mentioned, and then maybe Pepe, or I'm not upset about it. I'm just a bit confused, I suppose, as why we haven't seen more of Haji Wright in this tournament. I think Haji brings maybe more than a lot of other players would off the bench. So maybe he's another player that we would add. And then Berhalter, of course, for set pieces as another break glass in case of emergency option. I think those are the guys that make the most sense should the U.S. need to scratch and claw desperately to get back into this game.
Taylor, are you under the impression this might be, as a viewing experience, a bit of a frustrating watch, given the way that Bosnia might want to sit back and maybe push to extra time in this one? And if that is the case, is a key to sort of US victory to get something early on the board, to start pushing early and make sure that you can draw Bosnia out a little bit?
Would I like the U.S. to score early? Yeah, sure. That sounds good. I think no. I'd rather they wait till the 89th minute. I think
If I could choose, I would wait till the 89th minute, but I don't think we... Can we choose? Can we choose when the US scores? Do we have that power?
But how about both? How about first
sure.
minute, 89th minute, and then a few more in between?
My point being that I think the US have to come out the traps pretty quick, right?
Well, yes and no. Yes, I want the U.S. playing with intensity. I want them moving the ball fast. I want them, when they turn the ball over higher up, to go to goal. I want them not trying to set up and possess and look for kind of system approaches. I want them making Bosnia uncomfortable, and that could lead to drawing fouls, drawing penalties, but it could lead to them turning the ball over and then having to scramble to defend. I want the U.S. to stay not patient necessarily, but stay calm and don't get frustrated. One thing I think South Africa did really well was the vibes were incredibly high in their game. Every tackle was high-fived. Every attempt was cheered. Even if an attacker made the wrong pass or made the wrong choice, you didn't see his teammates getting frustrated or annoyed. You saw them thumbs up, good job, keep it going. And I think you have to have that energy, because the minute you start to just remonstrate every single decision and get frustrated with it should have been this pass, it should have been that shot. We saw it with Turkey in their first two group stage games. You can play into that quicksand a little bit, and you just start to get annoyed, and then I'm having a pot shot, and now you're having a pot shot, and now this guy's trying to shoot, and it just becomes a bit of a breakdown. I think if the U.S. plays with commitment and energy and commits numbers to the attack, I think that they can create opportunity. To your question, though, I think, this in the past would have been a game that I was very nervous about, and not trying to necessarily throw him under the bus. But in 2022, the line from Berhalter was what? The system is the playmaker, right? That the way we move the ball will open up our opponent. And I think there can be some truth to that, but you have to have the talent to execute that, and then you have to have the overall ability to make that happen. And I think at times we saw the U.S. Under Berhalter, but previously not have the talent to be able to keep the ball and cause problems for a team that is kind of resolute in their defensive approach, and that's where it can be frustrating. I have more faith in this U.S. team to press more effectively, to create those turnovers, and then to try to do something with those turnovers fairly quickly. But I also have faith in this team to move the ball fast and create shooting chances and take people on 1v1. So strangely, I think in a game that could have been very frustrating historically, and it might be frustrating depending on how long it goes, I think watching the U.S., my expectation is that they will be the more dominant team and have more chances. And in that way, I think as long as the supporters stay with them and don't start to get frustrated themselves, I think it could be a really fun game to watch the U.S. find a way through and employ skill sets and abilities maybe we haven't seen as much in tournaments past. It does feel like a team that can elevate given the opposition and given how much they back themselves, and I feel like this could be a game for that.
Yeah, I think the U.S. are going to find chances in this game. I really do. I think there are going to be opportunities for them, and so in that way, I don't think it's going to be a slog, unless Bosnia change something dramatic and do become suddenly a much more compact defensive team, which is a possibility. They are more compact than the U.S. will be in this game, or at least more defensive than the U.S. will be in this game. But I don't think even compared to some other teams that we've seen already in the knockout rounds, they are as compact. So there is, I think, an opportunity here for the U.S. to create chances. I talked about McKennie already. Pulisic and Dest being those 1v1 threats that I think can eliminate individual markers on the dribble. There's a lot of opportunity for real revenue there. I think about also other guys who could run in behind and cause problems that I think will be in the starting 11. Malik Tillman was really good at that against Paraguay, where he was making those runs into the seam, sort of opposite McKennie at times, coming out of the double pivot. Tillman has been unbelievably good in this tournament. So good. And I know the opponents have not been strong, right? And that's really still quite true in this game. So it's not like we should anoint him yet, but I think he has been crucial in this exact type of game so far this summer, and I would expect that to happen again, both his distribution from deep, but also his movement. And then another player who is exceptionally good at spinning in behind, Folarin Balogun. There will be opportunities for him to go and break beyond his mark. whichever Bosnia and Herzegovina center back is tasked with keeping tabs on him at any given moment, that player, because of how Bosnia defend, and it is quite man-to-man player-oriented, that player will be willing, I'd imagine, to step towards Balogun, which then opens up space for him to sort of check deep and then spin off and get in behind. Qatar, of all teams, had a really good chance that came from a move just like that in their meeting with Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I just think that this game sets up so well for so many of the U.S.'s best players and their skill sets, which have been quite complementary in games that will have a similar flow to this one already at this tournament. Obviously, there's room for Bosnia and Herzegovina throwing a wrench into the works or getting an early goal and that changing the calculations and them sitting deeper. Of course, all those things are true. But I am quite bullish on the U.S.'s chances in this game.
So, Joe, on that note, how Pulisic-centric will the US be, or how important is Pulisic to a good performance here? We've obviously seen two different USs, one with him, one without him.
I think he's important but not essential in this game, as I would describe it. And that sort of has been his role for the U.S. this summer, where I've talked about this before, but the fact that he was on the field for 25% of the minutes that the U.S. played en route to clinching a spot in Santa Clara in the round of 32, I mean, that's huge. And I don't think anybody really would have expected the U.S. to be as effective as they've been in this tournament without Christian Pulisic on the field. So I think his skill set does set up well to go and be that 1v1 player in this game. But even if he is not quite all the way there, and I think he is, basically. I mean, maybe there'll be a minutes cap on him, maybe. I'm just purely speculating here. But he looked ready to go and like himself in that game off the bench against Turkey. So if he can go the full distance in this game, I think he will be important for the U.S. and he'll be very effective for the U.S. But we've seen the United States navigate those situations reasonably well without him in this tournament. So I don't think he is as crucial as maybe I would have thought coming into a game like this.
All right, good stuff. USMNT taking on Bosnia in Santa Clara, 8 Eastern, 5 local on Wednesday. Can't hardly wait. Taylor Rockwell, good stuff. Thank you very much. Looking forward to it.
De nada.
There it is. Joe Lowry, thank you very much indeed for your contributions here.
I will assimilate.
Well done. Graham Ruthven, thank you very much, sir. We appreciate you and glad you're back on terra firma after your travel sojourn.
Yeah, it was quite the adventure getting back to Scotland, but I'm here now. Thank you, Ryan Bailey.
Excellent. And listener, thank you very much for joining us on this one. We'll be back on the feed very shortly with more World Cup Daily, but for now, bye.